So one of the strategies that companies employ is to create differentiation, is to advertise, right? But the challenge is that companies are necessarily actually creating more advertisement to actually differentiate, but in what's happening is that's actually creating more clutter. You're seeing advertisement on everything now, and we'll show you some examples in a second. But what happens is the industry is creating more advertisement, they're creating more shock ads or more intrusive ads. And what happens is, initially, that's creating some value for the consumer because it's breaking through the clutter and consumers are buying in on the short term. But what happens over a long time, I get used to even these shock ads. I get used to even the things that's more disruptive to me. And over time, that advertising becomes less effective. So what do advertisers do in response to that? Well, they create even more ads and even more shocking. And so it creates this cycle that it's hard to overcome. It's this vicious cycle that as advertising becomes less effective, the industry will start trying to do other things to connect with you and break through the clutter. So what you see now, especially in digital, a lot of the ads that are done are disguised as content. And so that's why content marketing is so big in digital and digital advertising right now. So again, the audience will buy into it in the short term, but soon we get wise to it, right? And then we're going to create a new barrier that's going to block out even that content ad because we know that, like, oh, you're just trying to kind of get to me, and it's creating more clutter and more intrusiveness. So I think you see it in like your day-to-day in terms of like your email marketing or some of the programmatic ads that pop up. A lot of the content that's trying to communicate value to you by saying it's content, but it's just advertising. You know, if you look at the 1970s, typical American was exposed to between 500 and 2,000 ads a day. And today we're being exposed to between 3,000 and 5,000, and they're everywhere. What happened in the 70s is ads used to be kind of more of the mass market ads, and you see them on television. Sure, there were billboards, etc. But today you're seeing ads everywhere. And this is an example just where it shows just an ad on an elevator. So these are just some more examples of just people trying to break through and trying to get their brand and trying to create that awareness and that association out. This is another one. This one is pretty cool, right? It's in a field in Iowa, and it's like trying to get people's attention and trying to break through the clutter. It's cool and it's creative, but is it work? Is it effective? Is it really creating through? This is another example of different forms of advertising, and this top one's interesting because it's looking at a company that created molds that went out and created imprints in the snow to actually get their brand out and brand message out. Same thing with the other two, just looking at different mediums or substrates to actually get their ad and get their message out. This one is actually a real company. So there was a company that was actually made about 15 years ago that would create advertisement on eggs. And so at some point this becomes ridiculous, but it's like, how can I get that image and impression to my consumers, and how can I communicate value? So people are pretty smart, so they get creative ways in terms of different ways or different things they can do to communicate value. You know, and at some point does it cross the line in terms of advertising, in terms of communicating value? Well, this is an example at a school where they're actually, you know, they're probably getting revenue for it, but they're actually communicating on the side of the school buses, where it used to be kind of a no-no to do that, and now I guess everything's fair game. So we've just seen some examples of clutter, and a lot of times companies have challenges. It's hard for marketers and advertisers to communicate value because of clutter. And you know, one of the things that we've seen, and we talked a little bit about, is feature clutter, right? So if you look in the category of toothpaste in terms of whitening, brightening, bad breath, you know, all the things that they keep expanding the features. And we talked about a little bit of that when we talked about segmentation, in terms of companies that they keep expanding and augmenting the product. And then so a lot of products become all pretty good because they keep adding and augmenting their features and benefits of the product as time goes on. A good example of this is in the car industry. So in the car industry, it used to be that there was this high-end cars and there were like stripped down models, but now even like today, a low-priced car has super good features and capabilities, right? So every car is actually pretty good in terms of that. But what's happened is it's created this competitive convergence where it even becomes harder for these car companies to compete on the basis of new features or different elements that they used to be able to win on in terms of luxury value or communication or comfortable seats, etc. Okay, so not to be insulting to you guys, but you know, we get exposed to, you know, all this clutter and this bombarding of messages. but we don't really process things faster or better than we did 30 years ago. We're not smarter than people 30 years ago. And so consumers are really actually pushing back and don't like this. And that's like the advent of some of the ad filters and ad blockers, et cetera. So one of the examples that I use in class a lot of times is, I say, how many people have actually drove to school today? And so everyone raises their hand and say, okay, how many people can remember a billboard or an ad they heard on the radio just in your drive to school? And the crazy thing is no one can usually remember even an ad they just heard or a billboard they just drove by. So what's happening is you're really good at blocking things out. You're blocking out some of the messages that companies are paying a lot of money trying to reach to you, trying to position, trying to communicate value to you. So the challenge is how can companies communicate value to their target customer with all of this, or these dynamics going on? So challenge, right? So people have all these choices. A lot of offerings have similar capabilities and quality and features. And we know that brand is really important. And what's brand relationship? Brand relationship is based on trust. So what do people do from a strategy standpoint? Everyone says, like, the big strategy, even we talk about it in this class, is like differentiation, be different. And so what does that mean? And think about this a little bit. Like, so what does it mean to be different? And then how do we communicate it? So we can figure that out. If we can figure that out, that question, that allows us to position successfully and be able to connect and create value and resonance with our target customers. Okay, so just to recap, remember, marketing strategy has three main components. We've talked about segmentation, so which market segments have specific needs that could connect with our products and service or our attributes. Targeting is which segment do we want to actually put our resources towards to communicate that value. And then we just talked about positioning, right? How do we communicate products, benefit, and value to that target segment, right? And so one of the things that we're going to talk about is creating the relevance in our positioning and in that strategy to our target customer. Okay, so this gets into like really how to create that differentiation and how we're going to be different. So how do we create differentiation? And one of the important elements is in doing that, it most likely needs to be vis-a-vis the competition. Sure, there's products that are new to the market that don't have any competitors, but they're competing on some evolutionary or benefit that doesn't exist before. That's in a way easier. But if you're comparing and competing with competitive products, you have to understand how they're communicating value in relation to how you're going to be communicating value. And so looking for these points of differentiation and how to communicate value, there's a lot of ways we can do it in terms of what we choose, So we've talked about the different strategic choices. Some companies are going to communicate value based on being more affordable versus the other side is some are going to be communicating value on we're superior or we're more distinctive, et cetera. And different value elements like that are going to resonate with different segments and different target markets. But at the end of the day, every product needs to understand what are the elements we're going to communicate value on, or what attributes, and that's going to lead to what their USP or unique selling proposition is to their customers.